everyone. Welcome to the second session of the 6 that you're going to get this season for sports nutrition support. And this second session is on carbohydrates. The first session talks about energy, the sort of total calories that you need to get to support your lifestyle and your training and playing. And then we're going to talk in this session about how key carbohydrate is as the sort of major part of your intake, again, to support particularly playing football. Okay, so what is carbohydrate? What are we talking about? So we get carbohydrate from plants. So most plant foods incorporate a large proportion of carbohydrate, and that's important, like I say, for fueling your football. Food contains carbohydrate, protein and fat, and the mixture of those vary. Different fruits, different vegetables will have different proportions, but as far as when we're thinking about carbohydrate, you can see the picture there. We're talking about fruit, veg, grains, cereals, pasta, rice, etc. And different forms of carbohydrate. We're not going to go into massive amount of science during these sessions, but we're talking about sugar, starches and fiber, and there are different types particularly of sugar, but these are all carbohydrates and can all be used as part of your diet to get the right balance to give you enough. We talked about fuel as energy, but the fuel we use during football tends to be predominantly carbohydrate, so you need to make sure the proportion of your diet is incorporating the right amount and at the right times. So every gram of carbohydrate we get 4 kilocalories of energy. We talked in the last session about that overall energy requirement. Well, carbohydrate has 4 calories. So if we talk about 100 grams of carbohydrate, we're talking about 400 calories of energy. So you can think about that in terms of, if you're trying to get 2,000 calories in a day, 4 meals, 500 calories would give you that amount of calories. So then you can see that 100 grams of carbohydrate will give you 400 calories. So you can see the sort of the amounts that you're starting to need. So sugars, we're talking about fruit juices, sweetened cereals, sweets, soft drinks, energy drinks, sports drinks. They all have sugar as predominantly the carbohydrate source within those types of foods. Starches found in cereal products, corn, potatoes, pasta, rice, bread. So again, it's a form of carbohydrate. It can be used to fuel our exercise. And then fiber, which we talked about how important that is for health when we looked at the overall balance of nutritional intakes. But you get those from whole grain cereals, bread, oats, fruit, give you that whole grain. Now, at certain times, we want to eat whole grain cereals for health purposes, and they do give us a certain amount of carbohydrate, but a lot of fiber is undigestible. So particularly when you get in that hour or two, maybe that meal before you're playing football, maybe the fiber content doesn't need to be as high because it can be sort of heavier in your stomach than some of the other forms of carbohydrate. So it's not only thinking about the overall intake, but it's also thinking about the types you might want to need at certain times. Okay, so why do we need carbohydrate? As we said, it's an important part of fueling your football, your training, your playing, because it's the primary source of fuel for muscle contraction, particularly at higher intensity. So football is an intermittent but high intensity sport, so you tend to need carbohydrates. So when we talk about further on in this session about what the recommendations are, the recommendations from UEFA and from FIFA and from the sports nutrition sort of fraternity is based on the fact that it's a high intensity sport, therefore you need higher levels of carbohydrate to fuel that exercise. So it's key for high intensity match play. And particularly as the game's developed, the intensity of matches has tended to get higher, so therefore this becomes even more important. And it will vary depending on position, tactics, the type of player you are, but particularly if you're doing a lot of high intensity, high speed running during the game, then you're going to be using up your carbohydrate stores. You know, I'd said before about it, sort of analogy to a fuel tank. You know, if your fuel tank isn't full and you're running around at high speed during the game, then you're potentially going to use that fuel tank up. So you need to make sure it's full when you start, and you need to have a way of topping that up, particularly if you're going to last a full 90-minute game. So low intakes have been shown to impair performance, and there's been various studies done, but one study showed that a larger breakfast, so 60% carbohydrate, actually increased dribbling speed. So it increased performance, as in the amount of kilometers that players were able to run, but it also had an impact on skill levels as well. So it's a double benefit in it'll keep you playing for longer and running for longer, but it also will maintain those skills during the later parts of the game. So there's some studies showing basically that how important intakes of carbohydrate and getting those intakes somewhere near the recommendations that are out there. So how much carbohydrate do we actually need? So recommendations, 6 to 8 grams per kilogram. Now that doesn't mean a lot to most people. I'm a sports nutritionist, maybe I've got a little bit of an understanding, but 6 to 8 grams per kilogram, what does that mean in terms of food intake? That's what I'm going to try and show you in this session. The actual intakes, the ones that I measured from the food diaries for last season, were showing more like 3.2 grams per kilogram, and that's pretty much in line with most of the research that's out there into sort of female football players. That the last session we said don't tend to get enough energy, this session don't tend to get enough carbohydrate, and that's partly to do with not getting enough energy, but that's also partly to do with the proportion of the diet that is made up of carbohydrate. So not enough energy can equal not enough carbohydrate, but what does that mean in terms of food? What am I saying to you that you should eat to get that 6 to 8 grams per kilogram? So this is the UEFA group statement. This came out in 2020 and was a big piece of work, and that's where this 6 to 8 grams per kilogram body mass comes on. This is, you know, on days particularly leading up to training and playing. And as far as the proportions of the diet, it's saying we should increase the amount of carbohydrate, and that can be at the expense of fat and potentially protein. We'll talk about protein in a follow-up session, because protein is important, but it's about timing, and it's about, you know, what you're fueling for. So therefore carbohydrate becomes more important when you get closer to match days and training days. Hence this match day -1, match day and match day +1, talking about this elevated amount of carbohydrate. And it's really about keeping that fuel tank topped up and optimized. But what does that mean in terms of foods? Here we've got a meal plan that I'll share with you over the next few weeks, but this is designed to hit these targets. So you can see here on the macronutrient analysis, the grams per kilogram body weight 6.2, and based on I think a 60 kilogram player, but getting to this 66% of carbohydrate, 6.2 grams per kilogram body weight, and protein at 1.4 grams per kilogram, which again is in line with the recommendations. And you can see the sort of things that's in the diet. So you're talking about a breakfast with muesli, orange juice, milk, which is giving carbohydrate and protein, lunch, bananas with pasta, a pasta sauce, dinner, yogurt, fruit, potatoes, peas, chicken. So it's not anything particularly different about the diet. It's just about the proportions. It's about the proportions and the timing. And then I mentioned about the importance of snacks last time, so you can see again some sports drinks, milk, bananas, grapes. So these things that are topping up during the day, even some chocolate, just to get you to that 2,200 calories, but getting that 6.2. So suddenly you're in line with those recommendations, particularly on days when you're playing and training. So like I say, I'll share that meal plan with you. So you've got that as some sort of suggestions. Now this is obviously you tailor it to your own taste and your own personal likes, but you can see just how the proportions should be made up so that you're 60% plus carbohydrate on those days when it's most important. So thinking about carbohydrate for peak performance, this is another suggestion that came out from the UEFA report, is that 3 to 4 hours before kickoff, before the game, 1 to 4 grams per kilogram. Now that's obviously quite a big spread, but at least if you've got some idea, right, 3 to 4 hours, I need a meal that's going to give me 60 to a couple of hundred grams of carbohydrate, and then 1 hour before 25 grams, and there'll be some suggestions coming up of what that could be. So you're topping it up that 1 hour before, but it's not a meal. The meal should be 3 to 4 hours before. 1 hour before, you're topping up again, and then potentially during the game another top up, 30 to 60 gram if it goes over an hour. So the obvious time is at half time to have something, whether it's a drink, a gel, a piece of fruit, just something that, again, you've used some of that carbohydrate store up in the first half, you top it up ready, so you've got your fuel tank maybe not full, but you've added a bit more. And then afterwards, to recover, again, you've got this 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram, so 60 to 100 grams of carbohydrate, which is about refueling, getting the carbohydrate stores back up again, so that when you come to training a couple of days later, that you're not starting with low levels and therefore underperforming. So if you go back to that meal plan, you can see that those 100 grams of carbohydrate for each meal, and the meal before, you're getting to those levels to create the right quantity and the right balance of carbohydrate intake throughout the day. So thinking about what you put in your bag, if you're going training and you're going straight from work, 3 to 4 hours before, maybe thinking about what drinks, what bars, what fruit you might be able to eat that's giving you some fuel to optimize the amount of training you can achieve during that session. So each of these meals are designed to give you those sort of levels, 1 to 2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram per meal, which gives you the right fuel to mean that you optimize the training you're undertaking and you perform as best as you can, and you don't start to suffer that fatigue and that breakdown in skills that can happen if you do start to sort of run out of fuel. So this was an infographic that came from one of the leading sports scientists in the field, and this is quite a useful one, I think, and you can pause on this and have a look at the sort of time, and this is talking about a 3 o'clock kickoff, the sort of timing and what you might have. Think about that meal plan. Your breakfast is giving you some carbohydrates and protein, and then the 3 to 4 hours before, you've got this pre-match meal, water, and then as you get closer to kickoff, maybe some caffeine. That's been shown to have, and we'll talk about supplements in another session. Again, just before kickoff, maybe this last period, you might have a sports drink or something that gives you 30 grams of carbohydrate, and then water, and something at half time, and potentially the importance of hydration. We'll have a session on that as well, and then some more towards the end of the game if there's an opportunity. And then the post-match meal, importance of refueling, but also taking on some protein, and we'll cover that in the next session. And then sleep is really important, and then potentially something, some of those snacks maybe before bed. So that shows you the sort of timing of the intake against that meal plan, potentially to optimize your nutritional intake on a match day. So that's quite a nice, useful visual to get in your mind of what I should be eating when, to make sure that I'm fueling properly for gains. So this is just some suggested food. So we're saying, greater than 1 gram per kilogram. So 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate. What does that mean in terms of food? So pasta with chicken and 500 ml of fruit juice. So fruit juice is quite a good one to add to a meal to increase the carbohydrate content. So thinking about, we will, like I said, we'll talk about hydration, but hydration would give you some carbohydrate as well. It's ticking 2 boxes: turkey roll, apple, sports drink, potentially. If you've got an evening game, then something a bit more convenient, something you don't have to cook, something you can just pack in your bag. Salmon, rice, peas, milkshake, 400 ml milkshake. These are all meals that are going to give you that 80 to 100 gram of carbohydrate, and potentially, again, for convenience, peanut butter sandwiches, peanut butter and banana, fruit smoothie, a 200 ml fruit smoothie. And these are all good balanced carbohydrate intake sources that are going to help to mean that you're eating the right things to get the most out of your playing. And then the other bit, so there was those those meal suggestions to get you the right amount, that maybe breakfast, maybe lunch, those that need those higher quantities. And then when you're starting to talk about this 30 grams of carbohydrate, which is that period just before a game or at half time, where you're not going to take in massive volumes of food, but you want to top up that carbohydrate, make sure you've got enough. Sports drinks, 500 ml will give you 30 grams. The gels tend to be in those proportions. You do need to take, with some of those, make sure you're taking fluid as well, water, to make sure that they're, you're hydrating and diluting those. A piece of fruit, a large banana, can give you 30 grams of carbohydrate. And again, this is all personal choices. Some players, it's quicker and easier just to have some sweets. So 40 grams of Haribo mix would give you 30 grams of carbohydrate because they're mostly sugar. But again, this is talking about topping up. And in dried fruit is another option. Just having bags of dried fruit, if that's what you prefer to eat and what you can stomach, and all these things you'll have to try out yourself and see what works for you, then potentially that's going to give you that little bit of extra carbohydrate to keep those levels topped up. So they're all quite useful practical suggestions for those sort of pre-game and then half time. So if we're looking at, this is just, again, you'll get a recipe come through. So this was a comparison I did when I looked at an original flapjack, which is a shop bought flapjack. They sell them in the sort of refectory here, but most retail flapjacks have quite a high proportion of fat. Yeah, they've got 50% carbohydrate, but we were saying we need it 60-70%. Obviously, that depends on how big the bar is, but 42% fat isn't going to help you. It's going to help with the energy, but it isn't going to help you during those high intensity activities. We want higher amounts of carbohydrate, whereas a homemade flapjack, like I say, I'll supply you with a recipe. You can then control the ingredients. You can make batches, maybe on a Sunday, on a rest day, make some batches of homemade flapjacks. You've got those through the week, and you can control, and suddenly half the amount of fat, much more carbohydrate, so much more useful as a source of an energy source for high intensity activity with that much greater proportion of carbohydrate. And there's the recipe there. So I'll send that out with these slides so you've got that potentially try. And again, it's one of those where it's got dried fruit and it's got apricots in this particular recipe, but you can put in whatever you like. It is about, it's using cheap available ingredients, but it's an easy, quick win as far as fueling you for your exercise, or something that you can take in your bag, take to training, take for after work, and can help with topping those levels up. And this bar has 38 grams of carbohydrate per bar, so we're talking about it's giving us more than that 30 grams which we were looking for to at those sort of top up levels. So again, just finishing off, this is a quote from Jordan Knotts. So one of the most important things I've learned is to eat more. I think now 70% of my focus is more towards nutrition than actually the way I train. So I'm not saying to you, you don't need to focus on your training, you do, but combining better nutrition with your training would improve your outcomes and improve your performance, which is ultimately what we're all looking for. So I hope you've enjoyed that session, and like I say, you'll get additional material over the next week to 2 weeks which focuses on the sort of practical application of this knowledge to say, okay, I know I need more carbohydrate, what am I going to do, what type of things do I need to eat. I'll send you some suggestions, and I'll send you some recipes that you can try out.